The racist and corrupt cops humiliated the black woman in court, thinking they were untouchable because of their badges, but what they didn't know was that their abuse of power would end right there, because they had just humiliated the state's chief of police. And what she did to them inside that courtroom left everyone speechless. It started with flashing lights and a loud, unjustified command, "Get out of the car now. Hands where I can see them." Her fingers were still trembling on the steering wheel. She wasn't speeding. She wasn't swerving. No taillight out. No expired tags. But that didn't matter. She was a black woman behind the wheel of a sleek black SUV, in a quiet suburban neighborhood where they thought she didn't belong. They pulled her over with smirks already forming on their faces, like the scene had been rehearsed. She stayed calm, spoke respectfully, followed every word they said, but none of it mattered. "Is this your vehicle? Or did you borrow it from one of your baby daddies?" one of the officers asked, laughing, as he circled the car like a predator. "I'm going to need you to step out now. Don't make this harder than it needs to be." She asked why she was being pulled over, and that's when things escalated. They slammed her door open, yanked her out, forced her to her knees in the middle of the road. Her neighbors, all silent, white, eyes peeking through blinds, did nothing. One officer snatched her purse and dumped it onto the sidewalk. The other forced her wrists into cuffs so tight they left bruises. "You're lucky we don't charge you with resisting. Acting like you got rights," one muttered as they shoved her into the back of the car. No one asked her name. No one checked for ID. They didn't bother running her plates. She told them she worked in law enforcement. "I'm a cop," she said, but they laughed like it was a joke. They didn't believe her. Worse, they didn't care. When she arrived at the courthouse the next morning for the hearing, still in her same torn clothes from the night before, with no chance to clean up or prepare, the humiliation didn't end. The officers strutted into the room like heroes, nodding to the judge, laughing with the bailiff. The courtroom was small, but it felt enormous with all eyes on her. Her wrists were still marked, her dignity still crumbling from the night before. The officer leaned over to the public defender, who hadn't even looked at her case yet, and said just loud enough for her to hear, "She thinks she's somebody. Wait till you hear the lie she tells you." Then, as she stood before the judge, one of them smirked and whispered directly at her, "Next time, just keep your mouth shut and know your place." That was the moment. Right there. The tipping point between silence and fire. The breath she took before her next words felt like it carried 1,000 other voices, voices of black women across the country who had been silenced, disrespected, humiliated, dismissed. The room waited for her to crumble, for her to beg, for her to shrink. But she didn't. What they didn't know, what none of them knew, was that she had been documenting them for months. That she had already filed internal investigations. That she was not just a police officer. She was not just another woman. Not just another defendant in their courtroom games. She was the one person in that entire building with the power to end every single one of their careers. They thought they had the upper hand. They thought they were the law. But the law had just walked into that courtroom disguised as a black woman in handcuffs. And when the truth came out, when she stood up and the tide turned, when her badge was revealed, when her voice thundered through that room, everything changed. So what happened next? What did she say that made the judge freeze? How did she dismantle a corrupt system from inside the very courtroom where she was humiliated? And what exactly did she do, that left every person in that room speechless? You'll want to hear this. Stick around. Before we dive into today's powerful story. To every black viewer watching this, we see you, we stand with you, and we support you. Racism, in any form, has no place here, not in our stories, not in our world. Plow of Twist is committed to using storytelling as a tool for justice, empathy, and truth. If you've ever felt silenced or underestimated, this story is for you. Now sit back, and get ready for a story that will shake the courtroom. Don't forget to subscribe to Plow of Twist and hit that like button if you believe in justice. Enjoy the story. It was late autumn in Jackson, Mississippi. The leaves had begun to change, painting the streets with patches of rust and amber, but nothing about the atmosphere in the city felt warm. There was tension in the air, a quiet pressure that had been building for years, one of inequality, of invisible lines drawn between neighborhoods, between people, between truths that never made it to the light. In the heart of this complex social terrain lived a woman named Monica Ellis, and she had spent her entire life learning how to stand tall in spaces that tried to shrink her. She was in her early 40s, sharp-eyed, composed, with a quiet authority that didn't need volume to be felt. To the public eye, Monica was an ordinary black woman, a face among many. But to those who truly knew her, Monica Ellis was anything but ordinary. She was brilliant, measured, and deeply principled. What made her even more unique, though, was what no one outside a very small circle knew: she held the highest position in state law enforcement. Monica was the chief of police of the state of Mississippi. Her rise to the top had not been easy. Born and raised in the Magnolia Terrace projects on the west side of Jackson, Monica had grown up watching her mother balance 2 jobs while raising 3 children alone. Her father had disappeared when she was 8, a casualty of a justice system that locked up black men like clockwork. Monica's older brother had followed that path too, arrested at 17 for a crime he didn't commit, sentenced without real evidence, and gone for almost a decade before finally being released and then disappearing from her life completely. That history lit a fire in Monica, and from a young age, she carried the weight of her family's pain not as a burden, but as fuel. She graduated high school with honors, joined the military at 18, and later used the GI Bill to study criminal justice. She entered the police academy at 25 and quickly stood out, not just for her physical capabilities, but for her strategic mind and her ability to listen. Over the years, she built a reputation for being unshakable. Fair but firm. Respected even by those who doubted her at first. She didn't smile much in public, didn't play politics, and never took shortcuts. That made enemies. Especially among the old guard, officers who saw her rise as a threat, not a triumph. But Monica had no interest in their approval. She had seen too much. She had buried too many young black men. And she knew the only way to change anything was to be where the decisions were made. Still, despite her rank, despite the years of service and discipline, Monica had a rule: when she wasn't in uniform, she moved quietly. She didn't flash her badge around unnecessarily. She didn't walk like someone expecting deference. It was never about power for her. It was about purpose. Which is why, on a chilly Thursday morning, dressed in jeans, a soft black turtleneck, and an old army jacket, she had blended in completely as she drove to pick up some documents from a small court office across town. No security detail. No press. Just Monica and her thoughts. That stretch of road she took was quiet, residential, lined with oak trees and older homes with American flags in the yards. It was the kind of neighborhood where people still waved at each other while watering their lawns. But it was also the kind of place where a black woman driving an SUV alone could still raise suspicion. Monica knew that. She felt it as soon as she turned onto Cypress Drive. A white patrol car began following her after she passed a small park. No sirens. Just shadowing her. She didn't panic. Didn't touch her phone. She turned on her signal, took a right. The car followed. Another turn. Still there. That's when the lights finally came on. She sighed and pulled over, already mentally preparing herself for the routine. But what happened next was far from routine. The officers, Officer Ray Dunning and Sergeant Brent Coulson, weren't rookies. They weren't unfamiliar faces. Monica had seen both of them in internal reports over the last year. Their names had appeared more than once in complaints about excessive force, unlawful searches, and racial profiling. Nothing had ever stuck. No video. No public outcry. Just statements dismissed or ignored. And now here they were, approaching her car with their hands already resting on their weapons. Ray knocked on her window with the back of his flashlight. She rolled it down calmly. "License and registration," he said curtly. "What's the reason for the stop, officer?" Monica asked, her voice neutral. Ray scoffed. "You were driving like someone trying not to get noticed. Mind if I ask what you're doing in this neighborhood?" Monica stared at him. "I wasn't aware that required explanation." That's when Brent stepped in, peering in from the passenger side. "You got an attitude or something? You fit a description. That enough for you?" "What description?" Monica asked, still calm. Ray opened her door. "Step out of the vehicle." "What's the charge?" "Step out. Now." The next 60 seconds played out with humiliating precision. She was yanked out, shoved against the side of her car, her hands twisted behind her back and cuffed without resistance. Her ID was still inside the glove box, never checked. Her car keys fell to the ground. Brent emptied her purse on the sidewalk, examining her things like they were stolen. A small crowd began to form. People standing on their porches. One woman recording with a phone. But no one stepped in. Not one voice said stop. Monica didn't yell. She didn't fight. Her body shook, not with fear, but with a deep, pulsing rage. And still, she said nothing. She didn't tell them who she was. Didn't demand her badge. Because she knew what they were expecting, a reaction. And Monica Ellis never gave anyone what they expected. They charged her with obstruction and resisting, loaded her into the back seat, and drove her downtown. She was processed like everyone else. Fingerprinted. Photographed. Placed in holding. She was finally released after several hours with a citation and a court date. The irony? The courthouse she was being summoned to was one of the very institutions she had helped reform. She had personally overseen the restructuring of that judicial district. She had even recommended the appointment of the current judge. But none of that mattered now. All that mattered was that she had been seen, publicly, as a suspect. A criminal. Another black face accused before being acknowledged. In the days that followed, Monica said nothing. Not to the press. Not even to her closest staff. But behind the scenes, she began gathering every piece of documentation related to those two officers. Complaints. Dashcam footage. Internal affairs reports. Things she had access to that they never imagined she would use. But she wasn't acting on revenge. Monica believed in structure. In doing things the right way. Her silence wasn't weakness, it was strategy. The day of the hearing arrived. She wore no badge. No uniform. Just a dark navy suit and braided hair pulled into a low bun. She entered the courthouse through the public entrance. Sat down alone on the wooden bench. Waited. Her name was called. She stood up. Walked to the front. The officers were already there, smirking, whispering to each other. The public defender glanced at her briefly, already assuming the type of woman she was. As Monica faced the judge, the courtroom full, something shifted in the air. She didn't tremble. She didn't plead. She simply stood. Tall. Still. And though no one knew it yet, every single person in that room was about to learn who she really was. But not just who she was, they were about to learn what she stood for. And how one woman, when underestimated enough times, can choose exactly the right moment to turn the whole system upside down. Would they be ready for that moment? Would they survive it? They were about to find out. The morning of the hearing arrived under a sky bruised with clouds, the kind that seemed to weigh heavier than just weather. Monica Ellis stepped out of her car, expression unreadable, and made her way into the courthouse with a stillness that bordered on unnerving. Inside, the corridors buzzed with casual conversations and stale coffee breath, but Monica's presence went unnoticed by most. She preferred it that way. The halls were familiar, even intimate. She'd sat in too many closed-door meetings here, signed too many reforms that had barely been enforced. But today, she was no longer the authority in the room. Today, she was the accused. Her public defender, a young woman named Tasha Millard, barely looked up from her file when Monica approached. Tasha glanced at her, eyes tired and voice indifferent as she said she'd be asking for a postponement. "It's a mess," she muttered, flipping through the folder. "No video. No witnesses willing to testify. And they're painting you as hostile." Monica nodded silently, watching Tasha with an almost clinical detachment. She wondered if the young lawyer even knew who she was defending. She didn't interrupt, didn't correct her, didn't offer credentials. She just sat, listening to the words being used to describe her. Across the courtroom, officers Ray Dunning and Brent Coulson leaned against the wall like it was a bar counter, laughing under their breath, tossing sideways glances that spoke volumes. Ray nudged Brent and nodded toward Monica. "Told you," he whispered, smug, "she'll plead out or run her mouth, either way, she's cooked." Brent chuckled, spitting a sunflower seed into a napkin. "They always try to act tough in the beginning. Then they cry about lawsuits and civil rights. Just wait." The judge entered and called the case. Monica stood. So did the officers. The courtroom wasn't full, but enough eyes were there to watch, to judge, to absorb every nuance. As Monica walked to the front, the courtroom quieted a bit, sensing tension that wasn't yet defined. The judge, an older man with glasses that slipped down his nose every few seconds, glanced at the paperwork and cleared his throat. "Miss Ellis, you've been charged with obstruction of justice and resisting arrest," he began, but before he could continue, the door at the back of the room opened slightly. Two observers stepped inside and took seats. Monica noticed them immediately. She had requested their presence quietly through an internal channel. No names, just a simple ask. One worked for Internal Affairs. The other, Federal. Monica remained still as the charges were read. Tasha made a motion to dismiss based on lack of probable cause, citing the absence of video evidence and conflicting officer statements. Predictably, the prosecution pushed back. Brent and Ray stood tall, taking the stand in turn. Ray spoke first, posture straight, face confident, voice tinged with practiced righteousness. He painted a picture of a combative woman who refused to cooperate, who challenged their authority from the start. He claimed she became aggressive, that she reached for something in her bag. The narrative was clear, they were heroes. She was a threat. Tasha cross-examined, but with little fire. She questioned inconsistencies gently, hesitated when pushing too far. She was outmatched, or maybe just uninterested. When Brent took the stand, his words were even more inflammatory. He said Monica had cursed at them, refused all orders, made threats. He glanced at her during testimony, daring her to speak. But she didn't. Not yet. During recess, Monica sat alone outside on a stone bench beneath a spindly tree. The sky had darkened, rain threatening to fall. One of the Internal Affairs observers approached. His name was Lyle Torres. He didn't sit. Just stood beside her. "You sure you want to go through with this like this?" he asked quietly, without looking at her. "You're letting them set the whole stage." Monica looked forward, then finally said, "I know. But people only remember the moment the lights come on. Not what happens in the dark." Inside, as the hearing resumed, murmurs began to build. A small group of activists had arrived, alerted anonymously. Among them were two mothers who had filed complaints against Ray and Brent in the past. Cases closed. Disregarded. They sat in the back, watching Monica with curious eyes, unsure what to make of her silence. She wasn't wearing power the way people expected it. No loud declarations. No drama. Just calm. But it was the kind of calm that hides hurricanes. Ray noticed the new faces. He leaned toward the prosecutor and whispered something. A nervous glance was exchanged. The prosecutor stiffened slightly but didn't stop. The trial moved forward. Monica's time to testify came. She stood slowly, walked to the front. She didn't sit. She placed her hands gently on the table and looked directly at the judge. "Do I have permission to speak fully, Your Honor?" The judge blinked, surprised. "As long as it pertains to the facts of this case." "I intend to speak only facts," she replied. Her voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. There was something about the way she held the space that made people listen. She began to walk them through the timeline, calmly, clearly. She recounted the stop, the tone of voice used, the actions taken. She described the feeling of being handled like a criminal without cause. Not just the actions, but the choices, the deliberate, humiliating choices made by officers who never even attempted to verify her identity. The courtroom listened, and for the first time, something began to shift. The mask of procedural order was slipping. Ray leaned forward, arms crossed, trying to hide his unease. Brent tapped his knee, silently bouncing it. Monica noticed. So did the observers. So did the judge. Tasha, now watching with widened eyes, stood and asked if Monica had any documentation of her statements. Monica reached into a small file she'd brought. She handed over a printout, a partial transcription of a phone call placed by Ray to dispatch, where he described her as mouthy and playing the victim. It wasn't damning on its own, but it wasn't clean either. It was just enough to stain. The prosecutor objected to its relevance. The judge allowed it. Brent's leg bounced harder. After the recess, more people had arrived. A journalist from the local paper. 2 more internal staffers. Word was spreading, but no one knew exactly what was coming. That was the brilliance of it. Monica wasn't fighting back the way people expected. She was building pressure. Quietly. Strategically. And no one could tell just how close they were to the breaking point. Tasha, now sensing something deeper at play, leaned over to Monica during a brief pause. "There's something you're not telling me," she whispered. Monica didn't respond. Not with words. Just the faintest smile. Back on the stand, Ray grew more defensive under renewed questioning. His answers became less sharp. The contradictions more noticeable. The smugness cracking. Brent avoided eye contact. The tension in the room thickened with each word Monica spoke. She never raised her voice, never made accusations. But she asked questions that lingered in the air longer than they should have. Questions about past stops. Patterns. Officer conduct. And suddenly, the story began to wobble. A hush had fallen over the courtroom. Even the judge seemed unsure how to proceed. Something about the tone had shifted. Something powerful was coming, and everyone could feel it. The courtroom wasn't just about this one case anymore, it had become a mirror for everything people were afraid to look at. And Monica Ellis, the woman they tried to bury in silence, was holding the mirror. As the sun began to dip outside the courthouse windows, a soft rain finally began to fall. Monica sat back in her seat, still composed, her eyes locked ahead. Her silence wasn't fear. It was preparation. Because the next morning, she wouldn't walk into that room as the accused. She would walk in as the storm. And when the truth hit, not a single badge in that courtroom would be safe. Rain poured steadily the next morning, a cold, relentless drizzle that wrapped the courthouse in a dull gray haze. But inside the courtroom, nothing felt quiet. There was a charge in the air, palpable, sharp, as if everyone instinctively knew something was coming. The usual sounds of rustling papers and casual whispers were absent. People spoke softer, moved slower, watched more closely. Monica Ellis walked through the main doors with quiet, deliberate steps. Today, she didn't enter alone. Behind her walked 2 sharply dressed men in navy suits, both with briefcases, neither saying a word. The district attorney's assistant saw them first and stood up, confused. One of the officers from Internal Affairs nodded briefly toward them, then walked past, murmuring something into a hidden mic on his collar. Monica's steps were unhurried. Her eyes moved across the room like a scan, absorbing everything but revealing nothing. She wore the same navy suit as the day before, now pressed and immaculate. Her hair was braided tighter, her posture straighter. She exuded something different today. Not just composure, but control. Full, intentional, unshakable control. Brent Coulson noticed it too. His legs started bouncing again. Ray Dunning scratched at the back of his neck and muttered something to the prosecutor, who gave Monica a brief look, then leaned in to whisper back. The judge entered. Everyone stood. As they sat, the judge looked tired but curious. He tapped his pen twice and called the case back into session. Miss Ellis, he said, it seems there's been a request for continuation of your testimony. Is that correct? Monica rose slowly, hands at her sides. Yes, Your Honor. With your permission, I would like to provide further context regarding the events under question, and introduce new evidence relevant to the conduct of officers Dunning and Coulson. The prosecutor stood. Objection, Your Honor, the defense has already concluded their testimony, but Monica didn't wait. She turned to the two men who had entered behind her. One of them, a tall, quiet man with a clipped southern accent, stepped forward and handed a sealed folder to the judge. These are transcripts, photos, and audio files obtained during a 5-month internal investigation into officers Dunning and Coulson, he said calmly. Conducted under direct authorization from the Office of the State Chief of Police. The judge blinked. I wasn't made aware of any such investigation. Monica's voice cut through like a blade. That's because it was authorized by me. I'm the Chief of Police. Silence exploded through the room. It wasn't dramatic. It was surgical. Controlled. Every jaw didn't drop all at once, they simply stopped moving. The public defender stared at her in disbelief. The prosecutor's mouth parted slightly as he tried to connect the dots. Brent froze. Ray blinked 3 times in rapid succession, then shook his head, like trying to wake himself from a dream. I'm sorry, what? The judge asked, his voice low. Monica stepped forward. I am Monica Ellis. I've been chief of police of this state for the last 3 years. I was pulled over, humiliated, arrested, and charged without a single verification of my identity by officers I've already been watching for months. The judge sat back slowly. You're saying this arrest was a setup? No, she said calmly. It was routine for them. That's the problem. It wasn't a setup. It was just another Tuesday. Whispers erupted in the courtroom. Murmurs turned into noise. The judge banged his gavel twice. Quiet in the court. Miss Ellis, I'm going to need clarification on your intentions today. I intend to submit the findings of my investigation as evidence in this case, Your Honor, she said, handing another folder to Tasha, who now looked like she'd been hit by a tidal wave. The report includes body cam footage that was previously deleted and recovered, audio transcripts from dispatch, and testimony from 3 prior complainants whose cases were closed prematurely. All of it documents a consistent pattern of racially motivated misconduct by the same 2 officers who arrested me. The prosecutor objected, but it was half-hearted now. The momentum had shifted. Brent leaned into Ray, whispering, she can't do this. This is illegal. She can't, she just did, Monica said, turning toward them. Ray stood up, rattled. This is abuse of power. She's using her position to do what, exactly, she asked, her voice suddenly sharper. Expose your lies. Show this room what kind of officer you really are. You set us up, Brent hissed. You let us arrest you on purpose. Monica tilted her head, not denying it. I let you be who you really are. That's all it took. The judge asked the internal affairs officer to approach. Quiet conversation followed. Monica stepped back. Her hands were steady, but her jaw tightened as she watched Ray, who was now pacing slightly. Brent sat rigid, his face pale. Tasha finally spoke. Your Honor, the defense formally moves to dismiss all charges against my client, and to open an inquiry into the conduct of officers Dunning and Coulson based on the submitted evidence. I want to see the footage, the judge muttered, looking overwhelmed. Now. They played it on the small monitor in the courtroom. No dramatic music. Just cold, grainy truth. The dashcam footage had been wiped from the system, but Monica's team had recovered a backup from an unarchived file. It showed the stop in raw detail. The language. The aggression. The way Monica remained calm while the officers escalated. It showed Ray laughing as he tightened the cuffs, Brent muttering curses, calling her entitled, uppity, arrogant. There was no resistance. No danger. Just a black woman being dragged for sport. The courtroom watched in frozen silence. When it ended, the only sound was the rain tapping against the window. The judge rubbed his temple. This court is adjourned until further notice, he said, voice strained. I will be forwarding this footage to the state attorney's office. Brent stood up too fast. So what? You gonna ruin our lives over this? Over one stop. Monica turned, eyes locked on him. Over every stop. Over every voice you silenced, every person you degraded, every lie you told on paper and expected no one to question. You tricked us, Ray snapped. You walked in here playing a victim when, I was a victim, Monica snapped back, her voice booming with finality. The badge I wear doesn't protect me from people like you. And that's exactly why I wore it in silence that day, because I needed the world to see what justice looks like when it's no longer blind. Brent tried to speak again, but the internal affairs agent stepped forward. They didn't shout. They didn't warn. They simply presented papers. Both officers were suspended effective immediately, pending a full investigation. The courtroom erupted again, this time with gasps. One of the mothers in the back began to cry. The journalist typed furiously. As they were escorted out, Brent called over his shoulder, this isn't over. Monica didn't respond. She didn't need to. Because everyone in that room knew something irreversible had just occurred. The curtain had been pulled back. The lies exposed. And for the first time, Monica Ellis stood not just as a chief, not just as a woman, but as a symbol of a truth no one could unsee. But what would happen next, in the days that followed, would be even more shocking. Because the fallout wasn't just coming for Ray and Brent. It was coming for the entire system that let them exist for so long. The days that followed moved like a storm no one could stop. What had started as a local court hearing quickly spiraled into statewide attention. The footage Monica submitted was picked up by the press, and within 24 hours, it aired on every major news channel across Mississippi. The images of her being yanked from her SUV, the language used against her, the clear contrast between her restraint and the officer's hostility, it all hit like a punch to the gut. There was outrage, disbelief, grief. But what shook people most was the moment her badge number was revealed during the live hearing replay. The chief of police. Handcuffed. Humiliated. And yet, composed enough to dismantle the very men who tried to erase her identity. Her name became a symbol overnight. Some called her calculated. Others called her courageous. But everyone was watching. Inside the police department, silence reigned like a thick fog. Officers walked carefully through the halls, conversations were clipped, eyes avoided. Monica's office door remained closed most of the day, her blinds drawn. Behind them, she worked, reviewing case files, writing reports, taking calls with state attorneys and investigative boards. But when the door opened, when she stepped out into the corridor or spoke in meetings, the room shifted. People listened differently now. Even those who once challenged her authority now stood with backs a little straighter, uncertain whether to be ashamed or grateful that she had pulled back the curtain on what they all knew, deep down, had been festering for far too long. One afternoon, Captain Denise Hart knocked on her door softly and entered. Denise had been one of Monica's most trusted colleagues for years. A sharp mind, a fierce advocate for accountability, and one of the few who had supported Monica's rise without hesitation. Denise sat down across from her, eyes heavy. "You blew the whole damn roof off this place," she said quietly, almost in disbelief. Monica didn't smile. She closed the file in front of her and looked up. "I wasn't trying to make a scene." "I know," Denise replied. "But it doesn't matter anymore. The scene made itself. They're calling from every county. Asking for statements, records. Asking who else has been protected for too long." Monica leaned back in her chair, her voice low. "Let them look. Let them all look. Maybe for once, they'll see." Denise was silent for a moment. Then she leaned forward, her voice softer now. "How did you hold it together? Sitting in that courtroom, letting them treat you like that?" "I watched the footage again. You didn't even flinch." Monica's eyes darkened. "I've flinched before, Dee. I've been stopped before. Harassed before. This wasn't new. The difference is, this time, I wasn't going to walk away with my dignity shattered and no record of it. This time, I wanted them to write it all down. Document every word. So the next woman they try that with, maybe she won't have to fight as hard." The tension hung in the room like smoke. Then, a knock at the door interrupted. An officer entered, awkwardly holding an envelope. "Chief, it's from the mayor's office." Monica opened it in silence. Inside was a formal request: attend a closed hearing with the State Oversight Committee. Her presence was strongly recommended due to the increasing public pressure. Monica folded the letter and looked up at Denise. "It's starting." At the committee hearing, the room was crowded with figures in power, elected officials, district attorneys, a representative from the governor's office. They sat behind long tables, their voices cold and polished. The chair of the committee, a gray-haired man with stiff posture and sharper eyes, cleared his throat before addressing her. "Chief Ellis, this is not a disciplinary hearing. But it is a matter of public concern. Your recent actions have created significant unrest in the state's law enforcement apparatus." Monica sat calmly, spine straight, her voice even. "With all due respect, the unrest wasn't created by me. It was revealed. You chose to hide your identity during an arrest," the man continued. "You allowed yourself to be processed as a civilian. Do you understand the complications that creates?" "Yes," Monica answered, without hesitation. "It creates a complication for officers who think a badge protects them from consequences. It complicates the belief that rank entitles one to automatic trust. I chose not to use my power because I wanted to see what justice looks like when power is removed. And I did. Now everyone else sees it too." The room shifted. Someone murmured. The chair leaned back, rubbing his chin. Another board member, a younger woman, adjusted her glasses and spoke. "Chief Ellis, did you anticipate the risk to your own safety?" Monica paused. "I've never lived a day in this uniform without risk. I carry risk when I go to the grocery store. When I walk my niece to school. This was no different. The only difference was the cameras." Another board member leaned in. "So this was intentional. A strategy." "I don't play games with injustice," Monica said, her voice heavier now. "This wasn't about politics. This was about truth. And if it takes discomfort for that truth to matter, then let people be uncomfortable." The session stretched for nearly 2 hours. They asked, she answered. Calm. Detailed. Unapologetic. When it ended, some avoided her eyes. Others nodded subtly, with the weight of recognition. The kind of recognition that comes when silence is no longer sustainable. Back at the department, an emergency staff meeting was called. Officers gathered in the main hall. Monica stood before them, no microphone, no podium. Just her voice. "I know this past week has shaken this building," she began. "I know some of you are angry. Some confused. Some relieved. But let me be clear, no one here is above the law. And no one here is invisible. If that makes your job harder, then maybe you need to think about why. If it makes your role more meaningful, then I ask you to stand with me. Because this department will never again operate in the dark." Silence followed. Then someone clapped. A few more. Then more. Until the room echoed. Not everyone applauded. But enough did. Enough to shift the weight. That night, alone in her office, Monica sat in the dim light, staring out the window. Her phone buzzed, a message from her niece, just one line, "I'm proud of you." She smiled faintly. But her eyes were tired. Because she knew the battle wasn't over. She had cracked the surface, but what lay underneath was deeper, uglier. A culture that didn't break with headlines. That didn't dissolve with applause. Still, she had done what they thought she wouldn't. What they hoped she couldn't. And they were about to learn something else. She wasn't finished yet. The days after the hearing passed like slow thunder, rumbles beneath the surface that threatened to break everything open at any moment. Though Ray Dunning and Brent Carlson had been suspended, their removal triggered a ripple effect no one had fully anticipated. The public demanded broader investigations, not just of the two officers but of the system that had protected them for so long. Local stations ran panel discussions on use of force. Community leaders organized town halls. Activists demanded resignations. The governor's office, once silent, issued a vague statement about law enforcement accountability and transparency. The facade was cracking, but beneath the cracks lay something more fragile, fear. Inside the police department, a line had been drawn, not by Monica, but by the truth she exposed. Officers who had long kept their heads down were now forced to reckon with where they stood. Some avoided her altogether, passing her in the hallways with stiff nods and tight lips. Others approached her in private, uncomfortable but honest, confessing that they had seen things, heard things, but felt powerless to report them. Monica listened. Not with anger, but with a deep, exhausting patience. She knew what silence cost. She also knew what it took to break it. But not everyone wanted reckoning. There were whispers of betrayal. Of her making the department look weak. Some senior officers argued behind closed doors that she had weaponized her rank, used the system to prove a point rather than protect it. There was an emergency meeting held by the police union, a heated session where the words insubordination, personal agenda, and civil liability were tossed around like darts. Monica wasn't invited to the room, but she knew exactly what had been said. Captain Denise Hart filled her in that night. "They're trying to figure out how to protect themselves now," Denise said, leaning on Monica's kitchen counter. "Not from the community. From you." Monica stirred her tea slowly. "They think I'm the enemy because I didn't lie to protect them." Denise's voice softened. "They think you changed the rules." "No," Monica said, eyes narrowing. "I just enforced the ones they thought didn't apply." Outside of the department, things were moving faster. A special committee had been formed to investigate the broader patterns of misconduct within the Jackson Police Department. Several other officers were named in connection to old complaints that had been quietly dismissed in prior years. The city council began debating the reallocation of public safety funds, urging more resources for community-led initiatives. Monica was called into multiple interviews with federal investigators, her testimony now considered a cornerstone in what could become a landmark civil rights case. But none of it came without consequence. Monica began receiving threats, anonymous letters, phone calls late at night with no voice on the other end. Her niece found a slashed tire one morning. A small group of retired officers started spreading rumors, accusing Monica of fabricating the footage, of staging the incident. The attacks weren't just professional. They were personal. Designed to shake her resolve. One evening, after yet another long day, Monica sat in her car outside her old neighborhood. She hadn't been back there in months. Magnolia Terrace still looked the same, run down but proud, kids on bikes, grandmothers on porches. She stepped out, walking past the basketball court where her brother used to play, toward the building where her mother had once lived. The place hadn't changed much, but Monica had. And yet, standing there, she felt the weight of who she used to be, the girl who had learned how to speak softly and walk fast, who memorized every cop's face by 13, who understood power long before she ever held it. A boy no older than 10 watched her from a stoop. He didn't say anything. Just stared. Monica smiled and nodded. The boy nodded back. That was enough. That small exchange, silent but meaningful, reminded her why she'd taken the risk in the first place. It wasn't about headlines or political clout. It was about shifting something deeper, what people believed was possible. What little black boys and girls thought they could become, or escape. Back at her office, the investigations continued. Files she hadn't seen in years were reopened. One, in particular, struck her hard, a case from 5 years ago involving a teenager named Elijah Morris. He'd been arrested during a school protest, injured in custody, and later found dead in his cell. The official report said suicide. Monica had been a deputy chief then, not yet in a position to challenge the findings. But now, reading the file again with fresh eyes and undeniable power, she saw what she'd missed before, the inconsistencies, the falsified entries, the missing footage. And Ray Dunning's name on the arresting officer line. She closed the folder, heart pounding. The implications hit her like a wave. Elijah hadn't just been a casualty of a broken system, he was proof that some wounds didn't just need acknowledgement. They needed justice. The next day, she called a press conference. The room was packed, media, activists, city officials, ordinary citizens. Monica stepped to the podium, her face calm but resolute. I came here today not to defend my actions, she began, but to confront something we have all allowed for too long, our tolerance for injustice dressed as procedure. She spoke of patterns. Of silence mistaken for peace. Of officers who had broken the law while wearing the uniform sworn to protect it. And then, with a steady voice, she reopened Elijah Morris's case publicly, promising a full reinvestigation and accountability for everyone involved. The room erupted in a mix of shock and applause. Some wept. Others shouted their support. But amidst the noise, Monica noticed the same faces from the courtroom sitting quietly in the back, community members, mothers, silent witnesses. They nodded slowly. With them, she didn't need cheers. Their presence meant everything. That night, Monica sat in her living room with Denise. Papers scattered across the table, coffee mugs half full. Denise looked over at her and asked, "Do you regret it? Any of it?" Monica didn't answer right away. She stared out the window, watching the streetlights flicker. "I regret how long it took," she finally said. "I regret every time I bit my tongue, every time I let someone off easy because I thought the system would fix itself. But I don't regret making them look in the mirror. And I won't apologize for forcing the reflection." Denise nodded slowly. "You think they'll ever thank you for it?" "No," Monica said. "But maybe their children will." She leaned back, her body tired but her spirit firm. The city was still on edge. The department still divided. Her name still controversial in some circles. But the line had been drawn. The tide had turned. And now, the real question remained, what would be rebuilt from the pieces? And who would have the courage to build it with her? The answer, Monica knew, was coming. It was just a matter of who would stand when it did. The air inside the precinct felt heavier now, like it was carrying the weight of something no one had the courage to name. The building hadn't changed, but everything inside it had. Desks still cluttered with reports, radios crackling faintly in the background, the usual tension of workdays had turned into something quieter, more watchful. Officers moved through the halls with clipped steps, eyes lowering when Monica passed. Conversations died the moment she entered a room, not out of respect, but uncertainty. She had become something larger than her title, and that terrified people who had grown comfortable in shadows. Monica could feel it in their silence. Not fear of her power, but fear of what it meant to be seen through. One afternoon, as Monica reviewed the updated internal misconduct reports that were flooding her office, Captain Avery Price knocked and entered without waiting for a full invitation. He was a man built from the old cloth, thick-necked, white, nearing retirement but still clutching authority like it was the only thing tethering him to relevance. His face was tight, lips thin, voice low and loaded when he spoke. He didn't sit. "You know the department is falling apart," he said, not asking. Monica looked up, setting her pen down with care. "No. It's being rebuilt. You've humiliated men who served for decades. You turned this into a circus. And now every officer in the city thinks they're walking on glass." She leaned back slowly, folding her hands. Maybe they should have thought about where they were walking before now. Price's jaw flexed. "There's a line, Ellis. You crossed it." "No, Captain," she said, her voice sharpening. "I held it. And when everyone else pretended it wasn't there, I drew it again." Price stepped closer, his tone lowering into something dangerously quiet. "You're not just exposing them. You're making enemies. In here. In City Hall. You're forcing people to choose sides, and not everyone's picking yours." Monica stood. Her voice didn't rise, but it filled the space between them with an unmistakable weight. "Then let them choose. Let them make it plain. Because this is not a department for people who need to hide behind silence and brotherhood to justify misconduct. If anyone feels exposed by the truth, that's not my problem, that's their reflection." He left without another word, but she knew he'd spread his bitterness to anyone who'd listen. Still, she didn't waver. Monica had long passed the point of seeking approval. She was preparing for permanence. The new policies she'd introduced were already in motion: mandatory body camera uploads within 24 hours, external oversight for every stop involving force, and an anonymous reporting system that bypassed the chain of command. Each change met resistance, but none were stopped. Meanwhile, the Elijah Morris investigation deepened. The more they uncovered, the worse it became. Witnesses came forward with new statements. An old classmate admitted Elijah had tried to report harassment days before his arrest. An officer in the holding facility confessed to falsifying logs to cover the gaps in the surveillance footage. And then came the document that broke it wide open, a printed email chain between Brent Coulson and another officer, joking about teaching the little protester some respect, the night before Elijah's death. Monica read it with hands that trembled for the first time in weeks. She brought the document to the district attorney's office herself. She placed it on the table in front of him, looking into his eyes with more fire than formality. "You're not letting this one go. You're going to indict." The DA, a middle-aged man known for political hedging, looked pale as he read it. "This will be messy. High profile. We'll need full review." "You've had 5 years," she said, coldly. "Now you've got 5 days." Outside, the city was bracing. Protesters gathered almost daily outside the courthouse and police department. Some came with signs honoring Elijah. Others demanded full audits. Monica stood at her office window often, watching the people move. She didn't speak to the cameras, didn't grant interviews, but her silence was powerful. She was present. She was there. And everyone could see her watching. One night, close to midnight, she received a call from Denise. Her voice was tight, urgent. "They tagged your house. Monica arrived to find her garage door spray-painted in bold red letters, "Traitor." The neighbors stood outside, murmuring. Police tape already lined her driveway. She stared at the word without blinking, without flinching. Denise walked up beside her, waiting. "They think that's going to stop me," Monica finally said, voice low. Denise nodded. "I know. But you can't do this alone." "I'm not," Monica said, finally turning away. "I never was." Inside her home, she found her niece on the couch, hugging her knees. The girl looked up, eyes filled with questions she didn't ask. Monica knelt beside her, taking her hand. "Do you still believe in what I'm doing?" she asked softly. Her niece nodded after a moment. "Even if it scares me." Monica smiled faintly, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "Then that's enough." The following week, the indictments were announced. Brent Coulson was formally charged with obstruction of justice, misconduct, and involuntary manslaughter in the case of Elijah Morris. Another officer, previously protected by union clauses, was named as a co-conspirator. The charges hit the media like a tidal wave. Monica didn't gloat. She didn't give statements. But she did attend the press briefing, standing in the back, arms crossed, eyes unflinching. Brent was brought in wearing plain clothes, handcuffed. He scanned the room and locked eyes with Monica, but this time, his smirk was gone. Only confusion remained, like he still hadn't figured out how the power had shifted. Afterward, Denise found her by the elevators. "You did it," she said, almost like a question. Monica shook her head. "Not yet. But we're closer." Back in her office, she found a small letter on her desk, no return address. Inside was a handwritten note, messy but careful: "My son Elijah would have been 22 next week. I used to think nobody cared. Thank you for showing me someone does." She held the paper in her hand for a long time. Not crying. Not speaking. Just holding it like something sacred. And somewhere deep inside, for the first time in a long while, she felt something shift. Not anger. Not vengeance. Hope. But hope didn't mean rest. It meant more work to do. More lines to draw. More voices to lift. And the next move, she knew, would be the one no one expected. The final choice. The lasting message. And that moment was coming fast. The fallout from the indictment wasn't limited to the courtroom or the front page. It settled like smoke through every hallway of the police department, into the conversations that happened in whispered corners and unspoken glances. People were no longer pretending this was temporary. The silence that had once protected them now felt dangerous. There was no going back to what they called normal. Monica Ellis had made sure of that. Still, the closer she moved towards something like justice, the more she found herself face to face with something even harder to carry: the truth about what had been accepted for so long. It wasn't just Brent Coulson or Ray Dunning or the officers now under quiet review. It was the entire culture that had raised them, promoted them, shielded them. Systems don't bend without screaming. And Monica could hear the screaming in every subtle resistance, every hesitant glance, every backhanded comment disguised as concern. One morning, while she reviewed the logistics for the citywide Community Accountability Board, a new initiative she had quietly begun drafting in the months before her arrest, an unexpected knock at her office door paused her thoughts. It was Chief Benjamin Kerrigan from neighboring Hinds County, an older white man with 35 years of service and a handshake like a vice. He had never visited her office before, though they'd crossed paths at state functions. He entered with the air of someone who didn't believe in formality anymore. Monica stood as he walked in, curious. "I won't take much of your time," Kerrigan said, his voice hoarse from years of shouting through windshields and over radios. "I just wanted to say something, and I wanted to say it to your face." She waited, motionless. "I didn't agree with your methods," he admitted, sitting without asking. "Thought it was reckless at first. Dangerous, even. But now?" Now I think it was the only thing that could have worked. Monica's posture didn't change, but her expression softened just enough for him to continue. I saw the footage. Read the reports. I've got grandkids now. One of them's biracial. Made me realize. I used to think the uniform made us honest. But it didn't. It just made us harder to question. She nodded once, slowly. Accountability shouldn't be revolutionary. But apparently, it still is. He looked at her then, really looked. They're gonna try and twist this, you know. They already are. I've heard what they're saying. That you let it happen to make a point. I didn't let anything happen, she said, her voice level. They just showed the world who they already were. Kerrigan nodded, stood, and reached into his coat pocket. He pulled out a folded letter. This is from my department's oversight committee. We're opening our own internal review. I want your people to guide the process. I want it to be real this time. Monica took the letter and looked at him for a long second. That's a start. After he left, she sat for a while without moving. The office was quiet, but her mind was racing. The city's political leaders had started calling her more frequently now, not with questions, but with offers. Invitations to committees. Requests for appearances. National news outlets wanted exclusive interviews. A book agent had even reached out through a mutual contact. She declined them all. None of it mattered if the structure didn't change. None of it meant anything if her story became another inspirational detour that left no lasting policy behind. Later that day, she walked into the community center downtown, where a youth justice panel was being held. It wasn't a press event. No cameras. Just folding chairs and kids from neighborhoods that had memorized the sound of sirens better than their own school bells. The organizer, a young black man named Marcus, greeted her with cautious optimism. She remembered him from a town hall she attended years ago. He had challenged her back then, said the department would never care about people like him. Now he offered her the microphone. When she spoke, she didn't use notes. She didn't rehearse. Her voice was low and measured, but every word landed heavy. I'm not here to convince you to trust the system, she said. I'm here because I didn't trust it either. I still don't, not entirely. But I believe in changing it. Not from the sidelines. From the inside. And I believe that every one of you deserves a seat at that table. Not when you're older. Not when you're more ready. Now. Because the people closest to the problem should always be the closest to the solution. A girl in the back raised her hand. But what if nothing changes? What if they keep lying? Monica didn't flinch. Then we keep standing. We keep documenting. We keep showing up. Not because it's easy, but because the moment we stop, they win. And I won't let them win. Afterward, as she left, Marcus caught up with her in the parking lot. You know, he said, breath fogging in the cold, I still don't trust cops. You don't have to, she replied. Just don't stop holding us accountable. He smiled a little. You're different. I shouldn't be, she said, and got in her car. In the weeks that followed, the city implemented the first wave of reforms. Every officer in Jackson was now required to complete community immersion training. A civilian board with investigative power was formed. Policies around traffic stops, use of force, and arrest procedures were rewritten and enforced. Monica didn't take credit in the press. She let the policies speak for themselves. What mattered wasn't her image, it was the foundation being laid. Still, not everyone embraced it. The police union filed a formal grievance, claiming her approach created a hostile work environment. An anonymous group of officers circulated a letter calling for her resignation, accusing her of weaponizing her identity. But something unexpected happened too. New recruits began to apply in record numbers. Not the usual profiles, either. Women. Black men. Immigrants. First-generation Americans. People who had never considered wearing a badge until they saw someone who made them believe it could mean something different. Then came a knock she didn't expect. Ray Dunning's attorney had reached out requesting a meeting. Monica hesitated at first. She had no reason to see him again. But something inside her pushed her to say yes. Not for closure. For clarity. They met in a secured room at the federal courthouse. Ray entered in a suit that didn't quite fit him anymore. He looked older. Smaller. When he sat down, he didn't speak at first. Just looked at her. His eyes didn't have the same arrogance they once held. "I didn't know who you were," he said eventually. "That day. I mean. I thought you were just trying to be clever. You didn't act scared. And I guess you just what?" Monica asked, her voice steady. "I guess I didn't care. Not about you. Not about anyone. It was just routine. That's the worst part. That none of it felt wrong until I saw it from the outside." Monica leaned in slightly. "You didn't need to know my name to treat me with decency. You didn't need to know my title to ask me for ID before throwing me to the ground." "I know," Ray said, looking down. "I keep seeing it in my head. Over and over." Monica stayed silent for a moment, then said, "The damage you did doesn't go away because you feel guilty. It doesn't get erased by understanding. It gets addressed by action. So what are you going to do now?" He looked at her, eyes red. "I don't know yet." "Then figure it out," she said, standing. "Because the only apology that matters is change." As she left the room, she didn't feel lighter. She didn't feel victorious. But she felt aligned, with herself, with the truth, with everything that brought her to this moment. The story wasn't over. But the weight had shifted. And what came next, would be hers to define. The spring that followed felt like a different city had been born. Not perfect, not healed, but awake in a way it hadn't been in decades. Change didn't scream, it whispered, in new hires walking into the academy wearing uniforms with pride instead of fear, in community forums where civilians actually had the power to vote down policy drafts, in daily reports that reflected transparency instead of silence. Monica Ellis no longer had to fight for attention, now people were listening before she even opened her mouth. The department was smaller now, leaner, many faces gone by resignation or reassignment. But those who stayed, they had chosen to. Not for the paycheck. For the mission. She made sure of that. Ray Dunning pled guilty to obstruction and accepted a reduced sentence in exchange for full cooperation in the investigations. He testified against former colleagues, handed over internal documents that led to even deeper revelations, and entered a restorative justice program that forced him to sit with the families of those he had harmed. It wasn't redemption, Monica didn't believe in that word. But it was movement. He would live with his name forever attached to a history he helped expose, and whether he ever truly changed wasn't Monica's burden to carry. Brent Coulson, on the other hand, chose a different path. He denied all wrongdoing, refused to cooperate, and faced trial alone. His case became a public spectacle, the court packed with community members, activists, former victims. The jury took less than a day. Guilty on all counts. He was sentenced not just to years behind bars, but to the loss of a future he had once stolen from others. For Monica, his fate wasn't a triumph. It was a reckoning. An echo of every ignored report, every silenced complaint finally brought into the light. Captain Avery Price quietly retired just months before the next election cycle. No farewell party. No badge ceremony. He packed up his office and left behind decades of policy and politics with no public statement. In the end, he was remembered not for what he built, but for what he refused to confront. And Monica didn't chase his legacy. She let it fade. Denise Hart was promoted to deputy chief, a move that Monica insisted on despite resistance. Denise had been loyal, yes, but more than that, she had vision, clarity, a spine. Under her guidance, the department's Internal Affairs Division grew into one of the most trusted branches in the state. Together, they restructured leadership training to focus on ethics, empathy, and equity. The shift wasn't just in policy, it was in principle. As for Monica, the final transformation came quietly. One morning, sitting alone in her office overlooking the city skyline, she received a call from the governor. A formal offer: become the Director of Statewide Public Safety and Policy Reform. It was the highest position available short of federal office. She listened to the offer in silence, weighing everything it would mean. The power. The visibility. The reach. She thanked him, hung up, and sat in stillness for a while. Then, the next day, she walked into a press room and declined the position publicly. She chose to stay. Not out of fear, but out of purpose. She hadn't gone through all of this to become untouchable. She did it to stay accountable. She wasn't going to lead from a distance. She was going to walk the same streets, sit in the same meetings, train the same recruits, stand in the same rooms where people once dismissed her. 1 year after her arrest, the department held a memorial service for Elijah Morris. His mother was there, holding the framed photo of a boy whose name had become more than a statistic. Monica stood beside her, no uniform, no podium, no cameras, just presence. She placed her hand on the mother's shoulder and whispered, "He wasn't forgotten. He led us here." And the mother, voice shaking, said, "You made him matter again." As the sun set that day, Monica didn't feel like a hero. She didn't want to be one. She wanted systems that didn't need heroes. She wanted accountability that didn't require a badge to demand it. And in that moment, she saw it beginning, not in the headlines or speeches, but in the quiet hope blooming on people's faces as they looked at her and finally saw themselves in power. Now, to you watching this story unfold, ask yourself this: what would have happened if Monica Ellis had just let it go? If she had used her badge that day, protected herself the way the system was designed to protect her? Would anyone have known the truth? Would Elijah's name still be buried in an old file cabinet, collecting dust and excuses? Sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do is not protect yourself, so the truth can protect others. This story isn't just about Monica. It's about every person who's ever been silenced and chose to speak anyway. Every time someone dares to sit in a room they weren't invited into and refuses to shrink. Every time someone refuses to move on until justice moves forward. So now we ask you, what would you do if no one believed your title, your truth, your worth? And more importantly, what will you do now that you know? If this story moved you, if you felt what Monica felt, humiliation, rage, courage, resolve, then leave a comment below. Share how it made you feel. Let us know what justice means to you. We want to hear from you. And if you want more stories like this, stories that twist, hit deep, and rise toward justice, subscribe to Tales of Twist. Hit the bell. Hit the like. And stay with us. Because the next story, it could be yours.